Okay, back one more time talking about poverty. Language in generational poverty is casual, as I said. Language in middle class tends to be a little bit more formal, tends to be about negotiations more than about survival. We don't tend to have to think a lot in middle class about how we're going to live, if we're going to be able to eat, if we're going to be able to find work, those types of things. Do we have a place to stay? Those sorts of things. We tend to think more about, well, what's our plan? What are you going to do? What am I going to do? How are we going to who's going to pick the kids up? Who's going to get groceries? I need some new deodorant. Pick me this up at the store. Get us hamburgers after work. All those kinds of things. Language in upper class tends to be about connections. Again, who you know. I saw so-and-so and they were with so-and-so. Did you know that they were together? Did you know that there was a divorce over here? I heard that so-and-so, is, I don't know, just stuff that, is all about who you're connected with again, and all about what your history is and what your heritage is. If we look at family structure, we already said that family structure in generational poverty is matriarchal. It's all about mama. And family structure in middle class is much more about patriarchal structure. These things, of course, aren't always true for every family, but they tend to be generally true that in middle class culture, we tend to think of a family as having a male person involved. And that's actually a little unusual sometimes in generational poverty. In wealthy culture, the person that we focus on tends to be whoever has the money. So if grandmother is the one who inherited the fortune, then the family is matriarchal. If grandfather is the one who inherited the fortune or made the fortune or whatever, then we tend to be more patriarchal. So it tends to be about who has the money, who has the connections, who has the importance to us. The worldview in generational poverty tends to be very local. You don't travel a lot if you're desperately poor. You don't travel a lot if you live in generational poverty. In generational middle class, we tend to travel kind of nationally, maybe a little bit internationally. And of course, in generational wealth, travel is not an issue for us, and we'll go to Europe or around the world anytime we need to because we can afford it, and it becomes kind of commonplace to us. Love in generational poverty is unconditional. It's based on how likable you are. Do I have fun with you? Do we get along with each other? Do I like to hang with you? Love within middle class is a little bit more conditional and tends to be based on what we do. I will love you and be with you and commit myself to you if you are a certain kind of person, if you have these qualities that I'm looking for, if you reach a certain level of character or success or behavior. Within generational wealth, love is really kind of based on connections. I love you because we're part of this family and this heritage, and you're my grandson and you're the heir to the fortune, and that's why we have a relationship. So in generational poverty, we tend to see people who have relationships that are based on how likable you are. Are you fun to be around? Are you sexy? Do you have a good sense of humor? Do you make me laugh? Do you make me feel good? Not what are the deep qualities that you have that are going to serve me well in the future. The driving force in generational poverty tend to be built around, as we've said, survival. We need to eat. We need a place to stay. We need money to do basic things. Relationships that are mostly built around the present, fun, entertainment, feeling good, being happy, laughing, enjoying myself, and entertainment. Middle class driving force tends to be work and achievement. That old middle class kind of mantra that I want my kids to have a better life than I had. That's based on this notion of always having to kind of move up the ladder, make more money, do better, be more successful. The driving force behind generational wealth is financial and political and social considerations. It's all about connections, and it's all about your heritage. You don't have this drive necessarily to create more wealth because you've already got it. The drive is to be connected. We don't see that so much in generational poverty. So I want you to see this kind of overall view of how people exist in generational poverty and think about, how do I apply that to people I see at church, to people I see in therapy? For example, I have a good friend who wanted to come to the mission and wanted to, it's kind of her thing, and she wanted to kind of teach a class on basic hygiene. She wanted to kind of see if there's a way she could help some of those folks that we have at our church who don't bathe very much and don't keep their clothes clean. And her intent was really good, because the idea was, if you do those things, you have a better chance at getting a job. You have a better chance at having good relationships with people, and those sorts of things. So she set up this class of people who to come to kind of learn how to present yourself for a job or for a relationship or in public. And she did real basic stuff like bathing, taking care of your hair, taking care of your clothes. And she got really, really frustrated because some of these folks just didn't seem to care, and then they just wouldn't do it. And when she mentioned it, I actually sent her this Ruby Payne information, and she read through it, and she said, "Oh my gosh, that's exactly what I've been dealing with. Being clean doesn't seem to be important." And I said, "Well, it's not. If you don't have something to eat, you know." And if you can go back, and if you remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if we don't have food and we don't have safety, we don't care anything about how we smell. And we don't care anything about learning to do a math problem if we don't have food, or we don't feel safe. So trying to understand the thinking process that's happening among the poor is one of the things that's super important to us when we're going to do ministry with the poor, or we're going to do therapy with the poor. I'm not going to ask a poor person to do some of the quote-unquote homework that we do in therapy, because they're not going to accomplish it, because they don't think that way. I'm going to have to be more creative. I'm going to have to come up with things that we can do, maybe even within the session, and say, okay, now don't worry about that. We'll do that again if you come back next week. Because the homework during the week is not going to happen. But I can do something in the immediate. I can do something in the present that may have an impact on them. So let's keep rolling here. I have next here just some pictures of some people. These are some real people that I know. These are all people that have been in our church at the mission. And I just thought I would show you some faces. I know you all have people that you know that might be just like these folks. But I think sometimes it helps. It's helped me, and it might help you to think in terms of real people and real stories. And I know that you understand this, and some of you have probably been very involved with these kinds of things. But I want to show you really quickly some of these people that I've been involved with. This is Lonnie. He was a guy who was lived in a little bitty nasty apartment for a long time. Lonnie was one of those guys that when he walked into the church, you could smell him throughout the building pretty much. He had that poor hygiene, and it was always somebody's job to try to get him into a shower and get his clothes into the dumpster and find him something else to wear, because he was always that dirty. He was also a little bit, cognitively dysfunctional, but for Lonnie, being clean was not an issue. It didn't matter to him, because he was trying to figure out what he was going to eat. This is a little lady called Lenora. Lenora had lots of tics. She wiggled around especially when she got excited. She couldn't keep her head still. She would jerk her head back and forth. And Lenora's dead. She died a little while back, and she died because of health care issues, because she's poor. A lot of people, have done that. This is Weasel. Weasel used to hang out by the McDonald's by the mall, because I don't know if you know this or not, but McDonald's throws away tons of good food at the end of every day, and Weasel figured that out, and he would hang out and eat McDonald's food out of the dumpster. There's a picture of Weasel in our church. You can see there he's got a cigarette that he brought into church. This is Jay and Mary. Jay and Mary actually got married. And Jay and Mary live on the street. If you've ever driven down Barrow, around Abilene High, down in that area, kind of close to the mission, you've probably seen them sitting on the corner there. They're homeless, and they camped out a lot. Here they are on the steps of Love and Care. Mary actually got hit by a car last year crossing the street at night, and she was killed. Jay's an alcoholic. He's also probably a little bit schizophrenic. But they have a relationship. They got married. They loved each other, and they took care of each other on the streets. There's a picture of Mary again. This is a guy that we used to call Chicken Randy because he lived out in the woods and he had chickens, and the chickens would come up and rip your arm off if you weren't careful. There's a picture of where Randy lived. It was an old torn up travel trailer that he had kind of fashioned into a cabin of some sort. He lived out by the railroad tracks off of Treadaway, and police finally ran him out of there, but he just lived in that little spot right there. This is a guy named Ron. Ron lived out in the woods over by the Martin Luther King Bridge. Ron died of liver failure. He's an alcoholic. That's where Ron lived. That's his camp. We went out there a few times to take him lunch and take him bottles of water and things like that. This is Randy, another Randy. This is a guy that honestly was really smart and really talented, but he kind of fell out of society and ended up homeless, and he's kind of a hobo. He drifted from town to town, and he sat out there on Judge Ely a lot, flying a sign. This is a little woman named Granny. There's Granny's house. Granny died not too long ago. She lived in a house that was completely heated by her stove in the winter. So she'd turn the stove on. If you went in there in the winter, it would be about 150 degrees. And if you went in the kitchen, her little stove had 4 red-hot burners going on it. And it was just a huge fire waiting to happen. And thankfully, she never burned her house down. There's her house. One of the things that happens in our culture is that the rich tend to get richer. And I'm not going to propose this to you as a way of thinking about how we should be conservative or liberal or Republicans or Democrats, but I just want us to talk a little bit about what it is that the poor live with here in our culture.